So you just unveiled your foreign policy.
Mm-hmm.
I want to start with that, and specifically on Iran. You said that you would re-engage on the Iran nuclear deal, but only with certain parameters that are stricter than the original one. What was wrong with the original one?
Well, I think that once you, again, I wouldn't have walked away the way President Trump did, but once you have made that decision, you don't just go back. If you're going to come back, there's got to be a different framework, and or at least some changes. And I think it's fair to say that Iran has continued to fund terrorist activities in the Middle East. I think it's fair to say that their testing and their willingness to engage in ballistic missiles should be somewhat restrained. And obviously the original intention was to restrain their ability to develop nuclear weapons. Maybe there would have to be, I don't know, some other economic concessions, some other agreement. What's tricky is that our allies, who we've worked so hard with in so many spheres of international relations, they're still engaged in that agreement. So it would be a pretty complex effort if we were going to try and rejoin the agreement now. And you know, they'd have to agree to reopen negotiations, Iran would have to agree. I'm not blind to those complications.
You did just talk about a two-state solution for Israel and Palestine. I know you're going to a pro-Israel event later today. How do you do things differently from the decades of attempts at this to actually make it happen?
You know, nothing that is really worth doing and takes work is going to be easy. Right? In other words, the hardest challenges are, you know, always going to be the ones that are going to be the greatest success. Tom Paine, in the pouring rain before the Battle of Trenton, wrote on a drumhead that without great struggle, there could be no glorious triumph. And every major social victory in this country's history has been built on the foundations of previous failures. We have to accept those failures, but learn from them. And we can't disengage. We've got to reach out and keep this notion of constant engagement with all the players. And you know, we can't just ignore what's happening in Yemen because it somehow seems peripheral to the security of Israel, our closest ally there. We have to recognize that it is all interconnected. And a solution has to satisfy the interests of all the players in the region.
Let me pivot to some domestic issues here. And an issue that, unfortunately, you know well. A couple of weeks ago, an 18-year-old died in the Highlands Ranch School. The week before that, 2 kids died at UNC Charlotte. First day in office, what do you do about it?
If you define, and some groups define 3 people shot, or some people define 4 people shot as a mass shooting, but we're seeing a mass shooting almost every day, somewhere in the United States. And we have to look at how we're going to change the culture of this country. And we can't go and say we're going to take guns away from everyone or anyone. Right? That's going to trigger a full-throated defense of the Second Amendment. That's a waste of everybody's time. But we should begin looking at things like universal background checks in every state. In Colorado, when we passed universal background checks and we got the local data, right? We were getting to 50% of the gun purchases, and 3,000 violent criminals tried to buy guns, and we stopped them, right? But it implies that there were another 3,000 that tried to buy guns and got them. When you lay those local statistics on a city-by-city or a state-by-state basis and you put them in front of the state legislatures, universal background checks, I don't know anyone who's going to stand up to it. In Colorado, which is a purple state, it polls at 90% approval.
What about the immediate concern, though, the safety of schools? Is there something that can happen, metal detectors, locks on classroom doors, that can immediately change the safety of classrooms?
Parkland changed our attitude towards schools forever, but we continue to see these mass shootings and where kids are killing kids. It's like any parent's worst nightmare. And I think we are going to have to go to metal detectors, and we're going to have more secure points of entry.
What about the psychological effect of putting a metal detector at the front of a school for kids? I mean, is that just a necessary factor at this point that kids might feel like, I mean, the thing that the psychological community says is that is going to make them feel like they're in prisons?
I've seen 2 arguments from the psychological community. One makes it feel like they're, you know, going on a trip or in a prison, some way they're not going to a school. But I've also seen other people that say that more and more children are feeling that they are, just by going to school, they are in some real way less safe than they are when they're in their home. and that providing some evidence that they are secure when they go to school will be comforting rather than creating anxiety.
Michigan Representative Justin Amash over the weekend became the first Republican in Congress to call for impeachment. I know that you have said that we should listen to what Robert Mueller has to say in testimony before talking about impeachment, but now that there's bipartisan support, what do you think?
Well, I think that usually where there's smoke, there's fire. And I think when you have Republicans beginning to, test the wind and be willing to go out and go against their leadership in such a blatant way, it suggests to me that there's probably more there than what we've seen yet. The real question, I think, is when we get a U.S. Senator who's a Republican to come out and say, I think we need to move, really examine impeachment. At that point, then the world changes.
Let me ask you about something that you said a little earlier this month. You were on Pod Save America, and you were talking about working with Mitch McConnell.
Or not.
And we're not working with Mitch McConnell, not being able to get anything done. But that his pledge when Barack Obama came into office that he wouldn't get anything done was treasonous.
Mitch McConnell, when he came in and said that he would do everything humanly possible within his power to make sure that as president, Barack Obama had no successes.
Yeah.
I mean, that's treasonous. I said verged on treason. That when Obama came in as a new president, and Mitch McConnell, in essence, said that he would do everything in his power to make sure that Barack Obama had no success, that everything he tried to do, Mitch McConnell would stop. That's without him knowing anything that Obama was going to do, right? That was a blatant, blanket statement. Basically, he was saying that he's going to do everything he can to make sure that America doesn't move forward. And I think that is, verges on treason, right? That someone is going out there and saying that they are going to do everything in their power to stop American progress in its tracks. I mean, it's not true treason legally, but it's an effective way of describing how alarming that should be.
Let's play out this scenario, though. You win the nomination, you win the presidency, you move into the White House, and Mitch McConnell is still the Senate Majority Leader, and you've got to be able to work with him somehow.
Sure.
I know that you've said you're not sure you could do much more than what Barack Obama did, but he's there. He's controlling the Senate. How do you bridge that gap?
You have to go reach out to him and go to him and meet with him, largely because it respects all the people that support him. And if he is obstinate and saying that no matter what I say or do, he's going to oppose everything I suggest, then it's my job to go to more moderate Republicans. Let's say we figure out a way to have the federal government partner with states and metropolitan areas to do transportation infrastructure and a new way of funding it. Is he going to oppose that? Well, I don't know. If he does, I can't help it. I mean, that's a place where I think Republicans and Democrats could find common ground, and that puts someone like Mitch McConnell in a very difficult position. Which is what he deserves.
Could you use that sort of infrastructure as a means to getting where we need to get to battle climate change? I know you don't support the Green New Deal as it is, but we've only got so much time left before the damage is irreversible. So,
right.
So what do we do about it? How do you get Republicans to buy in?
Again, this shouldn't be partisan. There's a couple of studies coming out that demonstrate that crops like soybeans are, because of climate change, are being planted further and further north in a steady process over the last 20 years. And that this study suggests that by 2035, much of that production will be in Canada. Republicans who traditionally represent rural interests have a real vested interest in addressing climate change. The president's job, my job, would be to align that self-interest with the broader self-interest around climate change, and recognize that we have to make a case that both economically and in terms of jobs, but most importantly in national security, international stability, climate change is one of the most pressing imperatives that we have.
Governor, thank you very much.
You bet.